Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
So much of getting an MBA is about improving your career prospects. And so much about improving your career prospects is landing that first or second post-MBA job, right? And really jumping into a new role that you're super excited about, that compensates you well, etc. Well, you're going to really enjoy today's episode because I brought on Steve Dalton, who is a senior career consultant and program director at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, where he himself got his MBA in 2004. Some of you longtime fans will know that I had Steve on the podcast 7 years ago to talk about his first book, The 2-Hour Job Search. Well, this year he published his second book called The Job Closer: Time-Saving Techniques for Acing Resumes, Interviews, Negotiations, and More. This is a continuation of his brilliant work, I believe, and I highly recommend both of Steve's books to many people I come into contact with who are undergoing a job search or now trying to, close the deal, so to speak. Steve has a line in his book that this book is a career center that fits into your pocket, and I think that's a great phrase to describe his work. For the price of 2 books, you can just get a lot of instantly actionable techniques to give yourself a leg up in your job search. So I highly recommend both his books, which I've linked to in the show notes. And remember while we're talking that even though we're talking about closing jobs in this episode, and for example, how to answer a tell me about yourself question in your interview, all of these techniques can really apply to your MBA application journey as well. And that's why I wanted to bring Steve on this show. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation and take away something from it. If you need help figuring out which schools fit you best, do check out touchmba.com, where we give you free school selection help. That's all at touchmba.com. And yeah, I'm excited to share this episode with you, and I'm sure you can hear the excitement in my voice when I'm talking to Steve. There's a lot to chew on here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Enjoy. So, welcome everyone to the Touch MBA podcast. My next guest is the author of The 2-Hour Job Search, a former strategy consultant, founder and CEO of the corporate training firm Contact to Colleague, and a senior career consultant and program director at Duke University's Fuqua School of Business, where he got his MBA in 2004. This year, he published his second book, The Job Closer: Time-Saving Techniques for Acing Resumes, Interviews, Negotiations, and More. He's on a mission to, quote, give job seekers straightforward frameworks that work fast and work well. Welcome, Steve. Welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast.
Great to be back, Darren.
So, Steve, I love your books, and let's just dive right into your second one. But I kind of have a unique question to start with. As someone who's spent a lot of time working on my own book dedication, I'm wondering why you dedicated your book to Thomas and Dorothy Dalton.
My parents are near and dear to my heart, despite having both passed. They were just early inspirations, both of them. From both of them, I really got my work ethic, which is a direct result when people ask me how you can publish books and hold a full-time job at the same time. Like it's finding stuff that you feel strongly about and feel are your contributions to the world, and then making the time for them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I know like that page is very underrated maybe to readers, but to authors, I know how important that page is. So that's great to hear. So Steve, it's been nearly 10 years since the 2-Hour Job Search. And for all of my listeners, please head back to episode 46, where I interviewed Steve, almost 8 years ago now. Can you believe
2014,
that? 2014, 7 years ago. Incredible. And that book really opened my eyes because I loved your sort of straightforward approach to instructions and giving a straightforward process to students on, how they could get those job interviews. And now we've come to the job closer. So my first question is, why did you write this book? I mean, writing books is not an easy thing. So why this one?
The audience that the 2-hour job search generated felt very strongly about it, really just loved it, that it was different. It offered instructions instead of tips. And I loved that. I love being able to help people and it wasn't just people who could afford business school. Anybody with a library card could now get their hands on this process. And it worked for people at all stages and ages in their career. But people would get interviews using the 2-hour job search, and they'd say, Steve, great news. I got an interview using your process. What books do you recommend for interviewing? And I'm like, I don't really have one. Like they tended to over-engineer the wheel, or they tended to just give tips, which was kind of my whole problem that got me into career services space in the first place. It was kind of maddening. There's a weird consensus. Well, there's not a weird consensus. There's a consensus in the business school career center space, at least, about answering questions that start with, tell me about a time when you led a team. Yes. Called CAR or PAR or STAR. There's lots of different variants of it, but it's still the same basic guts. But there was no such consensus around answering, tell me about yourself, even though we know that question's coming with 100% certainty. Or why do you want to work at this company? Same thing. We know that one's coming. There's no consensus for it. Or preparing a cover letter. We know we have to do it at some point, but there was no framework like there was for these tell me about a time stories. And that really, it frustrated me. I hate letting people down. And I felt like I was letting my readers down because I didn't have a book to recommend to them. And that's just how my brain works. I'm always coming up with recipes. So it took me 9 years to come up with that enough recipes where I was comfortable publishing it as its own cookbook for everything before the 2-hour job search, in terms of figuring out what you want to do and getting a resume together and writing cover letters. And on the back end, after you get the interview, how do you answer certain questions are coming well? How do you negotiate your offer, and how do you get off to the right start?
So tell me again why you favor recipes, why you hate tips so much. You start off the book with a very strong point of view.
Yeah.
And so yeah, tell me more about that. Why you hate tips.
I mean, if you dropped a ring in your sink or in your bathroom sink, you're not looking up a YouTube video on tips for how to get that ring out of the neck of a drain. You're looking for instructions. Like when you go to IKEA to buy a bookshelf, you're not looking for tips on putting the shelf together. You're looking for instructions. When we're stressed out and we're feeling out of our depths, yes, we find solace and comfort in exact instructions to follow rather than tips that we should then curate ourselves despite being amateurs. And for too long, the career services space has been tips only. Everybody's got a different approach. We can't possibly take a stand on how best to answer, tell me about yourself, because everybody's different. And that to me just felt like an abdication of responsibility. I've been doing this job now for 16 years as a career coach. I'm in a better position to curate a usable recipe or framework for answering, tell me about yourself, than a business student who's doing their first, second, or maybe fifth job search. So why don't I do the thing that I'm an expert and I'm more qualified to do, and let job seekers focus more on you adapting that recipe to meet their own needs, adding more garlic to the recipe instead of creating the recipe from scratch. It drove me insane that was somehow acceptable from job search intellectual capital. Here's 50 tips, go figure it out for yourself, novice job seeker, instead of me doing that work for them.
Yeah. And I love that you keep bringing up, tell me more about yourself, or TMAY, or TMAY, as you call it in your book, because that's actually one part of the book I want to come back to later. But, you talk about how you hate tips, and you talk about how this took you, 9 years to write your next book. And I'm wondering if that informed the format of the book, because I found you have the format of the book, before we dive into the contents, very interesting in that it's a question response. It's not the typical, okay, here's the topic, here's my, essay about the topic, but it's split into these like rapid fire type of questions. So can you tell me about that? Your reasoning why you did that? Yeah.
Yeah, the 2-hour job search is built around the same framework. And I think that's just a relic of how the process was born. And it was born in the fiery depths of a skeptical business school audience. And I love that. It makes my content better when I have students who are not afraid to push back and ask questions. But I started figuring out, oh, some of these questions recur. And in fact, these questions are a pretty good way of speaking up for the reader, pushing back on the subjects where I know like my audiences would typically push back. So the narrator of the book effectively is a stand-in for the reader. So questions or concerns or doubts that you may have as a reader are actively reflected based on the thousands of iterations of practice I've had developing these frameworks and recipes on students that I've worked with, both at Fuqua and elsewhere.
That's what it felt like. It felt like putting on some like well-worn mitts, to take like the chicken out of the oven and put it on the counter. Because not only do you have these, it's not quite an FAQ, but it's that dialogue. And then in addition to the dialogue, you have the troubleshooting at the end. So it's like even more kind of like questions addressing concerns of students, right, on top of each other. But you had a really interesting sentence in the intro, which you wrote, where is it here? So you said, furthermore, networking just works. For every job that goes to an online applicant, 12 jobs go to internal referrals. Networking is the only way to systematically get referrals. So transitively, it is the only systematic way to get interviews. And I found this really interesting because you basically say part of the reason you wrote this book is to get people back to the 2-hour job search. Because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that came across, and it was such a fascinating thing to say in a book, right? You're basically saying, like, I think the 2-hour job search might be more important part to focus on and spend more of your effort on, but let me also give you the best of what I know about the job closing aspects, right? And so I'm curious, if someone had 100 hours, like your friend Ed Bernier, right, who said 3 of those hours should go towards preparing your resume and no more, which you make a very convincing case for, where would you split that time between the 2-hour job search and the job closer?
Gosh, the point of the job closer is to get everything done as quickly as possible without sacrificing quality. It's the 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle. In most systems, you get 80% of your results in 20% of the time and effort before you hit what's called a point of diminishing returns, where further effort doesn't necessarily improve results. And I think the point of diminishing returns with resumes is when you start getting feedback that conflicts with itself from different people that you show your resume to. Once people are subjectively arguing, like, is managed better than supervised, like that's beauty is in the eye of that beholder. But like a typo is a typo. That is clearly wrong. Everybody agrees on a typo being wrong.
Yeah.
And so that's really what the job closer aims to do. I'm not trying to give you a perfect answer to tell me about yourself, although I really love the FIT model for tell me about yourself is perhaps my favorite single recipe in the whole book. It's to give you a recipe that you can quickly implement that does the job really well, like 80-20. It's not, may not win awards, although like if anyone would win an award, that would be that one. But it may not win awards, but it will, with a minimum amount of cognitive effort, memorization and development work, give you a pretty good answer really quickly. And that frees up more time. If you're spending less time agonizing over your resume, if you've got a good framework for a cover letter that allows you to crank them out faster, that gives you more time to go out and speak to people. So really, I think I'm looking for these things to take, I can give you kind of, I think about half your time is going to be on the networking piece, like the interviews. Okay. So few and far between compared to the groundwork that you're laying, reaching out to people, maybe getting ignored, maybe trying other people. But really, this is to help you, like if you get an interview at the last minute, like here's a book that you can just cram, like, and you can get good enough answers for the questions that you know are coming that carry the disproportionate amount of weight, namely the big 4. So you don't need to be an expert at 101 interview questions that people expect you to answer. You need to be really good at the 4 that come at the beginning that you know are pretty much always going to happen. The rest of it is gravy. By then, your die is largely cast. So really giving people a more scientific and mathematical approach to all of the other elements of the job search. At what point is it good enough? I deliver information that tells you when you can stop.
Oh, God. Yeah, I love that. Okay. And I can't wait to dive into TMAY, the Big 4, and FIT, because that's exactly what I want to ask you about. But one more question.
Absolutely.
Let's start with part 1 before the interview, where your first chapter is choosing a career. Okay. And the question you pose at the beginning of this chapter is, what should I do with my life? And I love this because basically I've struggled with this question, gosh, for decades now. And basically you're like, all right, in 63 minutes, you're going to have a pretty good idea of, what career you want to do. And I think a lot of people applying to business school, are still very much in the space, like trying to figure out where they belong, what they want to do for their career. So maybe we could start with content from that chapter in particular. Yeah. Could you tell me about like how you came to this formula?
I'm a big fan of design thinking. Even before I knew it was called design thinking, there's so much about the 2-hour job search and the job closer that is iterative by nature. It involves prototyping, coming up with a hypothesis solution, something I think might work, trying it out, and then getting feedback from that failure to better inform the next attempt. And so much of the choosing a career element. So mine is very much a meta survey of career selection activities. Some of them are very quick and dirty because I want, and some of them are well-established ones like StrengthsFinder. I'm a huge fan of it. And some of them are kind of build-ons like the How Your Talents Add Value exercise that I kind of lay on top of the StrengthsFinder exercise to make it a little bit more applicable to job searching. So that way you don't have to go read a bunch of different books. I've kind of brought all of the best concepts in one place that give you answers from a variety of different approaches. And that it's very similar to how you make the list of companies column in the lamp list in 2-hour job search, where there's 4 different brainstorming methods, and some will find certain brainstorming methods more effective than others. And I expect readers of the job closer will do likewise when they go through the choosing your career section. There's, I think, 7 or 8 different approaches to picking careers. Some will resonate more than others, but they're all built with efficiency in mind so that you're not investing too much time in any particular single exercise, which some of the better known career selection books out there might advise.
Yeah. I mean, and what are I'm just curious, when you give this exercise to Duke MBAs, what's the reaction? Because, do you actually sit them down and like in the room and it's like, okay, 1 minute, if your life depended on it, what skill, right, would save you, or what is your ultimate core sort of talent there?
My students find that exercise to be pretty clarifying because it just simplifies things down. I think it's so easy to get overwhelmed by the choosing your career. But when you think about like, what's the one thing I want to make sure my evaluation is based on? Yes. What is that one skill or trait? That has a really nice clarifying effect. If it's people skills, if it's analytics, if it's like something completely different, if it's creativity, if it's bringing structure to chaos, like something about knowing that, having it in your back pocket, especially for MBAs, especially MBAs who are about to start their programs, it gives you a hypothesis to go to company events with. And by that, I mean, like when you hear a company talk about why they're a great place to work, which happens for a lot of the big business programs, they'll talk about like what makes a good fit for people who work there, why they like it, why they like working there. And if you have that hypothesis to test, like that's effectively what you're doing when you go to these sessions, you're testing that hypothesis. Yeah, does this company really seem to do I think they would value my ability to bring structure to chaos, which I think is that one trait I would bet I'm in the top 1% of the world at. If so, great, I might be in the right path. This might be a good fit for an organization. And if that seems like, no, they much more want people who can follow instructions, like there's a right way to do it and they want to know people can execute flawlessly. Is that really where I want to hang my hat in terms of my evaluations or promotions or likelihood of getting a full-time offer?
I love that. And one more question on this section is, you basically say, let's not start from the perfect job and work backwards. Can you explain this approach? Because I think it was something I'd never read before. Yeah, what is your approach?
And this is just something, again, from the benefit of working in a career center environment for 16 years. I get the benefit of working with some of the smartest students in the world, like Fuqua students. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an alum. They're much smarter now than I was then. But they've never failed in their lives. Like to get into Fuqua involved being pretty much spot on at everything they ever tried to do. So coming into a business school environment where everybody's coming from that, haven't really failed too much background, it's hard to get out of that mindset of like, what am I really going to appreciate about this job? It's so much more tempting to go straight for well, I don't want to get the non-perfect job. What's the perfect job? Because it's not going to get anything else. But I just don't know what the perfect job is. And that's a very damaging way to think about the process, because you go in It encourages groupthink. Everybody thinks the same thing. And that's the proof, is that everybody else is thinking that same thing. But then you can never, the best you can do is match your expectations. You can never outperform. It doesn't leave any room for growth. And I think people would be better served to start from 0%. Like, what are all the pieces I can add to this job that would make it more appealing? Assume that you're starting with no job, and rather than you're starting with a perfect job and working backwards, start with no job and see how much you can put into it that you like. What percent of the time are you going to enjoy your work? And the more you can build that up, if you can get a job where you enjoy the work 50% of the time, that's actually surprisingly dramatic. And that's a much more attainable feeling goal, like to find a job building from zero where, okay, there's 25% I'm not going to enjoy, and there's 50% like that's going to be okay, but there's 25% I'm going to love. Like, okay, great. That's not a bad build. Let's see if we can improve on that when we talk to other companies. But again, it gives you a hypothesis as you talk to people, ask them about what they love about their jobs, what they'd change if they could. That'll give you a sense for what percentage of the time you'll enjoy that work.
I love it. Okay, so guys, you got to buy this book and read in depth this whole chapter. It's 63 minutes. That'll help you get a hold on, what jobs would best suit you. So let's move to the interview portion. So you cover resumes, you cover cover letters, interviews, after you get the job, negotiations, et cetera. But let's focus on this interview part. When I was reading your book, I was astounded by the level of detail that you went into on the TMAY question, specifically on the fit formula, and specifically on why you prefer favorite to over I'm passionate about. And like, when I was reading your book, I was like, this is amazing. Like, this is, as Steve said, you got to get ready for 4 or 5 big questions in your interview, because that's when, most of the impact is made. But you really explain, like, with so much nuance. So take us through why TMAY is such an important question to be prepared for, as well as fit.
Absolutely. So tell me about yourself. When I talk to my audiences about that, I'll ask them like, where does this question usually happen? And they'll raise their hand and say at the beginning. Okay, does it ever happen in the middle or the end? No, the audience will say, and I'll ask, why do you think that is? And the answer is because it's a rapport building question. It's used as a transitional question away from small talk, which precedes it, and into more direct questions about your candidacy. So I think a lot of people make the mistake of hearing, tell me about yourself, or it's mate, walk me through your resume, and immediately switching from the person who is small talking about the weather or about the sports match they watched last night into like, here are 3 reasons why you should hire me. Like, you turn into a totally different person, the sales bot. And the interviewer is thinking, man, I really wish the human being that was talking sports or the hometown with me like a minute ago would come back, because I'm just trying to get to know them. So tell me about yourself is important because it happens first. It is the immediate transition away from small talk. And employers are subject to this confirmation bias, just like all human beings. We tend to make up our minds quickly about things, whether we like them or not. And then we screen out information that disagrees with that first impression and only heed information that confirms our bias, which is that they like you or don't like you initially. So if you are awkward or too salesy or unprepared for that question that is coming after small talk called tell me about yourself, that's a negative impression that you're going to struggle mightily to overcome with. And the way that you overcome that confirmation bias is you present so much evidence to the contrary that the interviewer finally relents and admits they had a wrong first impression about you. But the better approach than that is just not putting yourself in that hole in the first place. It's answering, tell me about yourself well, knowing what the employer is looking for. And the employer is looking for a human being whose story just makes sense, someone that they can root for. So that's where I realized, okay, we know this question is coming. There should really be a framework for it. How do we do that? How do we accomplish a likable answer that doesn't require too much energy to tell so that you can remain a human being? And that's where TMAY was born. My solution to TMAY, which is called FIT. F is for your favorite part, I is for the insight that you gained, and T is for the transition you made. And it's a reusable format that you can just use for the entirety of your answer to tell me about yourself.
Yeah. So, could you give us an example?
Certainly. So I think one thing that I failed to mention is that 30% of there's a great study by Frieder van Eydeking and Raymer, which found that 30% of interviewers were making decisions in the first 5 minutes of the interview. And in that first 5 minutes is tell me about yourself. It's small talk and it's tell me about yourself. So to kind of, it's a deceptively easy question to answer poorly because you never really get feedback on it. So you'll feel great because you were talking about yourself and you got through it. So, and the interview didn't end, so you must have done okay. But it sets the groundwork. I mean, 3 out of 10 interviews are decided already by the time you're done with tell me about yourself.
That's so crazy.
It's crazy. And like, so I can't stand to tell you all interview questions are equal when 60% of decisions are made in the first 15 minutes. And that's when what we call the big four are covered, which is tell me about yourself, why this company, why this role, and why this sector. You won't always get all 4 of the big 4, but you'll usually get 1 or 2 of what we call the why questions, plus tell me about yourself. But back to how fit actually works.
Yeah.
Basically, rather than talk through all the things that you did, which is already in your resume, your responsibilities are already in your resume, and the person who interviews after you or who has that job after you would have the same exact tell me about yourself if you cover what you did. Like they'll talk about the same exact responsibilities, same exact tasks. Every other question you get in your interview will cover your what you did. But why you did what you did, that's the question that only tell me about yourself can answer. So fit really focuses you on the whys rather than the whats.
Yes.
So the favorite for each stage of your career, you would highlight your favorite part of a particular role. But if it were the perfect job, you would have stayed forever. So there had to be an aha moment, an insight that led you to think a transition would be appropriate, even if that transition is just accepting the promotion that they offer you. But by focusing your attention on one favorite task rather than 3 or 4 things that you did, your energy stays up. You're not working from memory, trying to regurgitate that laundry list of tasks that you want to make sure the employer knows about. They probably already read about their resume if they were interested, or they skipped it entirely anyway. But you'll have some natural energy. This is flattering to you. This is fun for you. Like this is your favorite part. So you're going to have that normal energy that happened during small talk. That likable person's going to shine through. And it looks like a humble brag.
Right.
It even gives you a nice positive way to talk about negative things. So I can tell you with honesty that my favorite chore is cleaning the toilet. True statement. I cannot tell you truly that I really enjoy cleaning the toilet or that I'm passionate about cleaning the toilet. It's the chore that I hate the least. It's done quickly and it makes a big visual impact. So like favorite chore, I don't enjoy it. But when people get in trouble as they start kind of dead-eyeing the favorite part, like they'll say, I really enjoy driving,
working with people from different backgrounds. And then your interviewer's like, nah, like something doesn't jive, right? That was like such a key insight.
Yeah. This story is yours. You worked hard for this life story. You need to enjoy telling it. If you don't care about it, your interviewer is definitely not going to enjoy telling it. But the nice thing about fit, favorite part, insight gained, transition made, lather, rinse, repeat. You can just do fits throughout your career for each level. Maybe you have one for your college major. Maybe you have one for a formative community service experience. Or you skip a job and you start with your second job out of undergrad. Like you can start wherever your true hero's journey begins, but that fit model, just use a fit for each of your stops along the way.
Yeah. And these can be used for your MBA interviews too. It's a great framework for MBA applicants, so it's kind of like you can get the practice while applying to business school. And then when you're going for these jobs, you can use the same fit framework for TMAY or tell me about yourself. Let's see. So, oh gosh, there's so much here. There really is. I mean, it's funny how you play so you have this acronym CAR that can become CART or SCAR. So there's so many acronyms. I'm sure someone will draw actually just a random question, but for your book, did you have like a illustration of all your acronyms and how they fit?
No,
I think that'd be super interesting.
Huh? I have that when I present on the job closer. I do have that slide, which goes from CAR to SCAR, which is it's a behavioral interview question where you add a setback at the beginning so that you can quickly move past the negative questions that you receive, the negative parts, the failure. So you can get into a story that you're more comfortable telling that's positive, or a CART story where you have where they ask you for a superlative, or you're using a story that you're not totally sure 100% answers the question. But I'd rather you use a story that's well practiced than one that you're telling for the first time in an interview. Just plan on having a takeaway at the end. So challenge, action, result is kind of the core behavioral interview question model that you'll see variants of at pretty much any career center. But the setback at the beginning or the takeaway at the end, or sometimes both, that helps you navigate certain types of questions that are considered more complex.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. And it'll be like so handy for someone in the interview to be like, okay, she's asking me about, what is your biggest weakness, or tell me about a time you failed. And then, yeah, like you said, the SCAR fits perfect with that. You mentioned in the intro that, prepare to be taken aback to the reader. And I'm just curious from an MBA customer perspective, right? Because that's who you're working with primarily. Like, what are they most taken aback by in this book, The Job Closer? Like, if you could pick one section or one part of advice that just is super counterintuitive to them, or just like causes them to kind of stop in their tracks, what would that be?
I would have to say, gosh, that's a really interesting question. I think the most counterintuitive element is probably fit. I think that is the idea that there could be a formula to answering tell me about yourself that works in a 30-second networking environment. You just use your most recent fit from your most recent job. So the South Park guys actually were an inspiration for creating the fit model, because they found that when they were writing plots, if the plot beats were connected by this happened and then this happened, it's a bad story. It's not memorable. There's no cause and effect. It's not really a story. So for a plot to be compelling and memorable, the beats of your plot have to be connected by but or therefore. So this happened, but there was an insight. Therefore, you made a transition. And their plots are all mapped out to have these buts and therefores to make sure that the story makes sense. But I think the idea that I can come in not knowing people and give them a format. In fact, when I meet students during the summer before they start their year, I'll just ask them these questions. So what was your most recent role? What was your favorite part of that? And what was the insight that led you to believe that business school was a good next step? Okay, so what are you thinking you might like to do after business school?
Yeah.
And then I'll take their words and immediately morph it. I'll translate it into fit format. And they'll be like, how did you do that? Are you a wizard? And I'm like, no, I'm definitely not a wizard. I just have a good Microsoft wizard for this particular task. And I think that really gets people to buy into the concept that recipes can be helpful. Like, I could make my own format. I could be unique, but unique is hard. And I'm not necessarily qualified to create my own TMAY answer when Steve has this recipe that works pretty well. And he just turned my words into something that looked like a movie plot and with about 10 seconds of thought. So I think TMAY is definitely the fit model for answering tell me about yourself. It kind of sets the groundwork for recipes can work, trust the recipes, at least start with the recipes exactly as written the first time, and then innovate on those recipes or create different recipes, but start with the basic recipe that we know works and with minimal effort.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be, going back to the South Park analogy, you'd have to be a really great storyteller to make, and then this happened, and then that happened, exciting and engaging, right? That's why I love the but and therefore. It's kind of like jagged. I see it as sort of a jagged line. Yeah. Versus and then is kind of a straight line that, could lull someone to sleep if you're not a great storyteller. But
I love that visualization. I think that's absolutely
true. Because it's what's happening next, sort of thing. And something you addressed in the book, and I want to ask you more about it is, well, what about your students that say this is too formulaic? Like what if I say this, fit, but everyone else interviewing from Duke Fuqua is also using my favorite part is this, won't I not stand out? So what would you say to that?
It's a great concern. I think where we get negative feedback on people answering tell me about yourself is the dead eye answer. It's the robot. It's the person who has no feeling or attachment to the words that they're saying. It's the person who believes that saying the right words in the right order are what get them advanced to the next round. And that's just not fun for the interviewer. It's not fun for the candidate either. But for the students who doubt that, I guess the other piece of, the other information that I put in front of them is that if you're in an interview day, the soonest they're going to hear another fit model is going to be a half an hour when they interview the next candidate. It's not something that you're using over and over and over again. But I would just say we're not always dealing with excellent solutions in every case. Often we're dealing with least bad solutions. So I would argue that fit is the least bad solution to the tell me about yourself robot problem. If you can find an improvement on it, great. but it can't involve you having dead eyes or laundry listing or memorizing everything word for word. You have to kind of find your own story engaging. And typically fit is what helps people do that. Focuses you on things that you genuinely enjoyed, that give you emotion and some likability when you go through your story, rather than just kind of rote rehashing of laundry lists of responsibilities.
So if you come up with your own, like, maybe you can add another letter to Steve's FIT acronym that you think, improves the TMAY answer. Go to his LinkedIn group, right? The 2-hour job search and the job closer LinkedIn group, because I'm a member there. Maybe you'll find me there, but you can kind of see it's quite interesting because it's basically real life case studies, and you have some supportive people helping you with that, right? That can sort of help answer questions people have. So yeah, do check that out.
Please do. 8,000 of us in there. And it's a great place to ask questions or just lurk and see what questions other people have as they try to implement concepts from both of my books.
Yeah. And I think, just to add on to that, I think you said something like, whether it was the FIT formula or the CAR formula, the interviewer, even if the interviewer knows it might sound kind of formulaic, it conveys the information the interviewer wants in the shortest, most effective space, right? Essentially. So
we've been conditioned to follow movie plots our entire lives. And so when you give someone a story that has pivots, things happen. Like there's a but. Oh, there's a therefore. Like I would take a formulaic movie over just a list of things happening in a movie. Right. Like I get some formulas are tried and true. Don't mess with them. Like there's a romantic comedy, the meet cute, and then they get into a fight and then they get back together at the end. Like we can know the entire plot of the movie and still enjoy the movie. And I think FIT is very much of that piece.
Yeah. So we just covered a thin slice of the job closer. Yeah, definitely get the book to read through the whole thing. It will definitely help you with your MBA applications as well. But Steve, because you are also involved in the career services department at Duke, I thought it would just be a great opportunity to just sort of ask you questions about your experience there as well for our listeners. The first one I have is about trends that you think future MBAs should be aware of. I'm wondering what employers are looking for maybe 10 years ago has changed from what they're looking for now and what they may be looking for in the future. I'm wondering, if you have any thoughts there.
I think what they're looking for is actually pretty consistent. I think in the job closer, I talk about what we call the 4 buckets of work.
Yes.
And this year, when we presented this information to our students, we kind of showed them samplings of job postings from a variety of different industries that MBA students are interested in. And we kind of pulled out, okay, just these were random postings, yet you can find these 4 buckets of work heavily represented in these very different job postings. They're still all looking for the same things. The 4 buckets are, they want people who can lead. They want people who can collaborate. They want people who can solve tough problems. And they want people who can get things done. And I find those 4 buckets have been so clarifying for my engineers or the transitioning vets that we work with, who think like my background is so different than what I'd be doing next. Like I don't know how it applies. Getting out of your head about these transferable skills and instead focusing on like, can you do those 4 buckets of work? And everybody will say, yes, of course I can do that. And then kind of digging in a little bit deeper, what's your style for getting things done? Like and StrengthsFinder is so helpful there. The how your talents add value exercise that I talk about in the job closer has been my single favorite innovation of the last couple of years.
Awesome.
I'm just so psyched about it because it helps people put into words their style for getting things done, how it's different from other people's styles. So it's ownable. Everybody has to get things done to get a job. But when you realize that your style is completely unique, and StrengthsFinder is a big piece of figuring out why you're unique, why your approach to getting things done is unique, it's so helpful. So I think focus more on the similarities rather than the differences. What they're looking for now is the same 4 buckets of work they were looking for 10 years ago. Just know that your experience is transferable. Don't worry about trying to find buzzwords they care about. Worry about focusing back on those 4 buckets of work and being confident that you understand your style for getting those 4 buckets of work accomplished. So that's what I'd say in terms of what employers are looking for. I don't think it's different. What I do think is different is how they're finding talent. I think COVID is going to be a pretty dramatic disruptor. as employers see that campus recruiting as it was always done, like, and just kind of had its own momentum. It was done the same way year to year. This year is an interesting evaluation. Like suddenly last year, all the travel was taken away.
Right.
So we had to find other ways of doing things. And I think we're in kind of a settling phase of figuring out what works. What does campus recruiting look like going forward? Is it a virtual thing? Is it a hybrid thing? Does it change by company? That means students will just have to be more mentally flexible, that we can't tell you exactly what to expect in terms of which companies are going to be recruiting in what way. So job seekers have to have a Renaissance person kind of skill set. They have to have the ability to form relationships virtually and in person. But then again, that's like the concepts of networking don't change. The 2-hour job search is, it was updated after 8 years, and everything got changed slightly to be more efficient and more effective, but the guts are still the same. It was developed during the 2008 financial crisis. It worked during the boom years, and it worked, when COVID hit.
Yeah.
So I think really focusing on just being flexible with the actual delivery of campus recruiting, that's going to be the change that most of people entering business school will want to have on their radar.
I was about to ask you for a tip, and then I bit my tongue. I know you don't give tips. I know you don't give tips, but have you learned, let's put it this way, have you learned anything interesting about how someone recruiting virtually or online, right, a student, can build that connection more deeply or more effectively than in person, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think COVID was an introvert's dream, or a fellow, I'm a pretty awkward dude, so a fellow awkward person's dream, in that it took you out of that environment that never played to my advantages. I never played well in that scene where it was 10 people in a circle holding drinks around an employer. Like but I knew that was not my turf, so I didn't try to compete on it. I just listened well and made good notes about what people said and sent really informed thank you notes. And that was kind of I took a very writing and correspondence oriented approach to building relationships because I wasn't comfortable in the big cattle call groups. And I didn't even love one-on-one informationals. I didn't really have a framework for it, and it didn't come intuitively to me at that age when I was going through business school. Now it's very clear to me, and I want to share those instructions with everyone. But I think in response to COVID, a lot more of this networking we're not doing the big cattle call type events. It's a lot of breakout rooms, and it's a lot of one-on-one follow-ups with people that you like. So I think, furthermore, I find Zoom to be so much better than the phone. It's just easier to understand if you're engaging a person, if their energy level's up. So I find that to be an easier format because you don't have that. I didn't understand what you said. If you're working in a second language, you have the benefit of seeing someone's lips. So you can do a little bit of lip reading to help kind of make sure that you're understanding appropriately. So I find the shift to Zoom away from the phone to be dramatically advantageous to people who would otherwise feel disadvantaged in an all in-person networking environment. So I really like the changes. I think the key is just, if you focus on learning, you'll get job leads. If you focus on job leads, you'll get neither. And I think Zoom and one-on-one networking, following up on a big event, is so much more valuable for the learning piece that the job leads will reveal themselves in time if you form genuine relationships. But that's really at the heart of what all my work is about, the 2-hour job search and the job closer. How do you have meaningful conversations with strangers to systematically turn that total stranger into an ideally a mentor in the course of a single half-an-hour conversation?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's just fascinating to me because, when I make all the big decisions in my life, what college to go to, even what company to work for, I have a very deep sense of place. Like, okay, I go step foot on campus, I step foot in the building, and I get a certain feeling. And, for so long, I've told candidates, if they can visit the schools, please do it, because I think, being there can really make a difference. But now with this sort of, even, the biggest companies in the world moving to almost fully remote, it's, I don't know, I feel like I would have a hard time getting that sort of feeling and then sleeping on it. Oh, I want to talk about that exercise. It's so great. So Steve has this exercise about, whether you should take the job or not, right? You get the offer, and I'll ask Steve to elaborate on the method, but this can also apply to which MBA program to go to, I think. So let's talk about that. Yeah.
The sleep on it exercise.
The sleep on it exercise. Yeah.
It's one of my all-time favorites as well. And that's one I've had for a while, but I just didn't have any place to really publish it. So when the job closer came out, I was like, of course, this is definitely going in here. Oh, people who come back years later, who graduated years ago, who will say like, you taught me this like a decade ago and I still use it. Like, it's so helpful. So the sleep on it exercise, whenever you've got a difficult decision, which school do I attend school A or school B? Do I accept the job or do I turn it down for what I really want? My recommendation is imagine that you're going to school A or you're going to accept the job. What I want you to do is for the next day, write down every pro and con that you can think of to that decision. Get it out of your head and onto paper, because I find that, especially my MBA students, they tend to obsess and cycle in their brains over and over the same points. So get them all out of your head and onto paper. Make sure you've captured all of them. Add to it over the course of a day. And then that night when you go to sleep, imagine that you accepted the offer or you chose school A, that option that you were thinking of taking. Go to bed, but have a notepad next to you. When you wake up, first thing, write down exactly how you feel.
Your body, just everything.
Yes, holistically, how do you feel about the decision that you made last night to accept the offer or go to school A? Because the body is really good at processing regret. And by giving it overnight, letting it process the regret you would feel for the path not taken. You didn't choose school B or you didn't turn down the job. Make a note of how you feel. Do you feel relieved? Do you feel nervous? Do you feel tense? Like, you factored all the things like what comes next if I turn down this offer? Like, that anxiety is baked in to your decision. But then the next night we reverse the process. So same thing, add pros and cons to your list. Imagine that you're going to go to school B or you're going to turn down the offer, and then repeat the exercise and make a note of how you feel the next morning. And I find people, regret avoidance to me is the single most telling metric in terms of deciding whether you are making a good decision or not. And I think so many people overlook it. Its effectiveness, boiling up or gathering up every single extraneous detail into one number. Like, am I going to regret this decision more than the other decision? And the sleep on it exercise really focuses you on holistically quantifying that regret. There's not 1 point per pro and 1 point per con. Right. Ultimately, the blended average of all of those things is going to be something that your body processes, and your body will tell you which approach it prefers.
That is brilliant. That's brilliant. And I think a lot of your books are kind of, it's about that regret avoidance, right? I mean, in many ways, what you're doing is giving people these recipes, these instructions, so they don't have that regret. Right? That whether it's freezing in the interview or spending too much time on a resume, which didn't, need to be spent, et cetera. Steve, last question for you. I've kept you for almost an hour here. This is a selfish question. I've asked for my audience. Now, this is a selfish question. So you talk about outer rings and inner rings when it comes to careers. And you kind of hint that you might be an outer ring type of person. I know I'm definitely an outer ring person. And I'll just read a quote, and so it can kind of jog your memory of what you wrote, but I'd like to talk more about this. Where you say, whereas bullseye people can get away with postponing happiness and living for tomorrow due to the high likelihood they'll find their match eventually, be it a career match, a relationship match, or a best friend match. It's even more important for outer ring people to live for right now. And I mean, I would love to get my summary of what you said, but I'd like to hear it from your words, from your mouth, because I'm sure you come across, right, some students who are like, I want to like finance, I want to like consulting, I want to like, tech, but that's just not me. Like, I'm meant for something else, and I'm having trouble finding this career path.
This is a concept I came up with like more than, 25 years ago. So it's something that's been with me a long time. It's very, very meaningful to me. So for those of you who aren't familiar, the bullseye analogy, like when you look at a bullseye, like after it's been well loved, you'll see a cluster of hits around the bullseye, a dartboard. You'll see a cluster of hits around the bullseye. And as you get further and further away from the bullseye, the hits start to spread out. There's fewer hits. And I've always said, like, a lot of people, if they're generally likable, they have generally appealing qualities, they're close to the bullseye, where there's fungibility. There's other people who have those same qualities. But as you get more eccentric, you start to move out a ring or two or three. And as you get further out, like what your friends from the bullseye will tell you is, oh, just find somebody from the second or third or fourth ring of the dartboard to like go work for them,
Find the fit
or
there.
go date those people. But what they don't realize when you live in the bullseye is that as you get further away from the bullseye, it's less populated. There's just fewer people who you can relate to, fewer organizations that you can relate to. And just because you meet an organization that's on the fourth ring, I consider myself a proud fourth ring person. Just because I meet another organization that's in that fourth ring doesn't mean we're compatible, because they might be on the entirely opposite side of the dartboard, even further away from the bullseye people from me.
Yep.
So you just have to get used to doing things your own way and being happy with it. Like pursuing what you want now, because there's no guarantee that perfect match will ever come. So you're really just trying to find something good. What do you want to prioritize finding right now, and look for that. But it really is about making your own energy, making your own juice, because you can't trust that it will be provided to you by an organization or a partner or some other kind of goal, where if you had a more kind of middle of the road taste, you could be confident you'd find it.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you, Steve, for coming back on the show. I keep writing books, so I have more excuses to talk to you.
Absolutely. It's been delightful. It's nice to be back after 7 years. And hopefully, writing is a difficult activity for me, so hopefully it'll be another 9 years before we do this again.
Exactly.
But thank you, everybody, for listening. I really appreciate your attention today.
Yeah. And so, I'll link to Steve's website, his Twitter, his LinkedIn group, all that in the show notes, so you can get into contact with Steve or follow him. So thanks again, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Darren. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Remember, you can get free school selection help and a profile review at touchmba.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search for Touch